And if we catch you in vow with a homosexual, your parents are going to know about it first. And you will be caught. Don't think you won't be caught. Because this is one thing you cannot get away with. This is one thing that if you don't get caught by us, you'll be caught by yourself. And the rest of your life will be a living hell.
People talk about being in and out now. There was no out. There was just in.
It was as if they were identifying a thing.
He's a faggot, he's a sissy, queer. Something snapped. It's like, this is not right.
This time they said, we're not going. That's it. We're not going.
There was no going back. We had discovered a power that we weren't even aware that we had.
Throughout history, gay and transgender people have been persecuted and discriminated against. This includes actions as extreme as violent crimes to a simple refusal to provide them a service. Gay Americans were constantly forced to hide their identity and sexual orientation at the risk of losing their jobs and homes. Gay bars were routinely raided by police, and members of the gay community were often attacked, and in some brutal cases, murdered by people who disapproved of their lifestyle. Until recently, there has been no protection of these minorities, making much of this discrimination legal. New York City was one of the strictest in upholding anti-sodomy laws, including the act of homosexual sex. It was punishable by a fine, and in the worst cases, a life sentence. In the late 1960s, gay and transgender people were powerless, facing discrimination from society and inequality in the face of the law. At the same time, unrest over civil rights was reaching a peak. 1968 saw the high point in protests against the Vietnam War, the growing force of the women's liberation movement, and the assassination of Martin Luther King. It was a time of marginalized groups resisting oppression, but the LGBT community had so far remained silent. That changed in 1969 when the Stonewall Riots erupted, the first major protest against the unfair treatment of gay and transgender people. It helped to bring awareness to their plight and started a nationwide conversation about LGBT rights. Spurred by members of the LGBT community exploring their rights, the cataclysmic Stonewall Riots of 1969 forced an encounter between protesters and police, as well as with the rest of American society, sparking the LGBT movement in America, and leading to the exchange of ideas that would eventually lead to the expansion of LGBT rights.
It's actually against the law to serve an open homosexual at a bar. It was against the law.
It was a seedy bar. It was run by the mafia. They only opened it to make money off of gay people, to exploit gay people.
It was the best bar at the time. And because you could dance, the music was great. We just didn't have things like that.
The bar was dirty, it was unpleasant.
Jukebox was great. And drag queens controlled that.
It was early morning on June 28, 1969, in the Stonewall Inn, a popular gay bar in New York City. A police unit created specifically to raid gay facilities began a raid on Stonewall Inn. Stonewall was one of the few safe havens for people in the LGBT community, where people could go have a drink and be themselves. Because it was a gay bar, Stonewall was regularly raided, but this time was different. As the police moved in, a drag queen who had already been arrested and thrown into the paddy wagon started the chain reaction. Kicking a cop in the chest, he managed to escape and encouraged others to follow his lead. The crowd began to throw cobblestones and bottles, smash windows, uproot parking meters, and dance in Rockette-style kick lines. The police were unprepared for people to fight back, and the 8 officers were unequipped to handle the crowd. They were accustomed to 2 or 3 cops being able to handle with ease any number of cowering gays, but here the crowd wasn't cowering. It had routed 8 cops and made them run for cover. The cops holed up inside Stonewall, while the crowd outside gained control of the street and continued to wreak havoc. Eventually, the police were able to call in for backup, and the tactical police force, designed to control riots, arrived at the scene. After a few hours and the use of brute force, they were able to disperse the crowd, but only for a night. Over the next 5 nights, crowds of over 1,000 came to Stonewall to continue the protests and make a stand for the LGBT community.
You had no legitimate right to really even exist as gay people.
So there was no place where you could be sure at the beginning of the night that you wouldn't suffer an attack.
The LGBT community started to explore the idea of equal rights, following in the footsteps of other civil rights movements of the time. Seeing other minority groups take a stand and fight for their rights inspired them to do the same. And oppressed people can only go so long before they begin to fight back. Stonewall was the spark that set off the ticking time bomb that was the LGBT rights movement. Protesting caused the press to get involved, and the press spread their story. Even if most people still didn't understand or agree with the LGBT lifestyle, they began to think about the issue of unfair discrimination and treatment. LGBT people had always been kept hidden in the dark. This was the first time their story had been shared. In order for cultural change to occur, people need to be aware of the issue. Although their story was being spread, press and society still had a largely negative view of the LGBT community. In the 1960s, gays, lesbians, transvestites, and transsexuals encountered opposition from the majority of society. People thought homosexuality was a mental disorder and that homosexual sex was equally as terrible as pedophilia or incest. They were forced to stay in the closet as society viewed them as disgusting, and police believed they were committing a crime simply by being a homosexual. But just 1 year later, in 1970, the first openly pro-gay sentiment was printed in the newspaper, The Black Panther. The article stated that the Black Panther Party had been inconsiderate concerning gays and lesbians. The encounter at Stonewall brought attention to the LGBT community and helped people to begin seeing things from the point of view of those being discriminated against and to understand that it was wrong. The exchange at Stonewall between the LGBT patrons of the bar and the riot police was a pivotal moment in history. It marked the start of the long fight for rights and equality for lesbians, gays, and transgender people. This original violent exchange paved the way for change in the future. The 60s and 70s was a period of many civil rights movements. Blacks were protesting to end segregation and for the right to vote. People across the country were a part of the Vietnam anti-war movement. Feminists moved for equal pay and more women in the workplace. In a time of changing American culture, it was the LGBT community's turn to stand up for their rights in the hopes that they would be accepted along with other groups in search of equal rights.
Hauled me into the 6th precinct, where I saw young gay boys chained to the radiators in the 6th precinct being beaten with nightsticks. He said to me, "Look away." Hard to look away.
The Stonewall riots were the spark that started the LGBT rights movement that still continues today. Like many other minority groups, the LGBT community was unfairly persecuted, but nothing was being done to end that until Stonewall. It was the first event that brought attention to the difficulties of the LGBT community. Within a month of the riots, the Gay Liberation Front organization was formed, and within 4 years, almost 800 gay and lesbian organizations were formed across the United States. This provided representation that lesbian, gay, and transgender people had never had before. In addition, 4 years later, the American Psychiatric Association declared homosexuality was not a mental disorder, helping to improve the public image of the gay community. While still being discriminated against, it was no longer punishable by the law to be lesbian, gay, or transgender, and life gradually began to improve for the LGBT community. In 2004, Massachusetts was the first state to legalize gay marriage, a big win for the LGBT community, as many states soon followed.
Find out that DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, was repealed in the United States by the Supreme Court.
This morning, the Supreme Court recognized that the Constitution guarantees marriage equality. In doing so, they've reaffirmed that all Americans are entitled to the equal protection of the law.
In June 2015, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional to prevent marriage between homosexuals, and gay marriage was legalized nationwide. That same month, the Stonewall Inn was given landmark status, showing how far America has come from the 1960s. The encounter at Stonewall, known as the Stonewall Riots, led to the exploration of LGBT rights and equality. It opened the eyes of the American people to the injustice and set off the chain of events leading to the movement still going on today.